All right, folks, welcome aboard. Tonight we're going to be doing Exodus 19 and 20. We started off the last time we were together last night. Jethro was helping Moses out by giving him some uh, pointers, some advice on how to set up a government, some administration and stuff. So Moses wasn't having to do it all, and so today we're going to see the beginnings of laws and the beginnings of uh, the the statutes, the ordinances, the things that the Israelite nation, later the Jewish nation, lived by. Uh, we're not quite to the Ten Commandments written in stone yet. A lot of people come to Exodus 20 for that, and while those laws are given here, they're not they're not the stone version of it, which is going to come a little bit later in the book. So anyway, we're reading out of the King James. I have the ESV up for some modern English. Still haven't figured out how to do the window in a window thing, but I do have the software for it. My friend Steven, who's constantly on here, is helping me out with that. I really appreciate that and all the support that he gives. So we'll have that up whenever I can get to it, whenever I have time to sit down and learn it. So uh, anyway, Exodus chapter 19. If you are here, like I said, I don't have a way to see who's online. I could try to pull it up on the phone, sort of, and see who's here. So I've got one. Hello, Aaron. Um, and then we can go ahead and get started. But if you are here, drop a hello and say hi so I know who all is watching. All right, Exodus 19, starting in verse 1. In the third month, when the children of Israel were gone forth out of the land of Egypt, the same day came they into the wilderness of Sinai. Now, again, map-wise, a lot of people. Hey, Paxton, welcome aboard. A lot of people, when they read about the wilderness of Sinai, they think what we call the modern um, Sinai Peninsula is what they're talking about. That it's between those two forks of the Red Sea, uh, and that they're wandering around in that little area. That little area is not a big enough area to call a wandering wilderness. They It is my very firm belief that they crossed, that they bypassed the first one to the north and then kind of came down through what we call the Sinai Peninsula to the second fork and crossed almost where it forks, and then headed into Saudi Arabia. And so this wilderness in the desert of Sinai is actually in Saudi Arabia. There's a little bit of a mountain range along the western border of Saudi Arabia where Mount Sinai is likely to be. So just from everything that I've studied and from all of the maps and the accounts and stuff that I've seen, it makes more sense for that to be the case. So anyway, uh, verse 2 says, they were departed from Rephidim and were come to the desert of Sinai and had pitched in the wilderness, and there Israel camped before the mount. And Moses went up unto God, and Jehovah called unto him out of the mountain, saying, Thus shalt thou say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel. Okay, so they're in the desert of Sinai, and he goes up to a mountain. It does not necessarily say at this point, hey, Dean, Mark, welcome aboard. Does not say necessarily that this is Mount Sinai. It's just that this is the desert of Sinai. We got to keep those names straight because there's a lot of times where, in fact, people call things like this the Mandela effect, where we've heard things and there's this kind of group think where everybody believes a certain thing a certain way because it's been believed that way for so long and taught that way for so long, but it's not necessarily what the Bible actually teaches. Is not accurate, and one of these things is some of the names and stuff. So this is the desert of Sinai, and there's a mountain in the desert of Sinai that Moses goes up onto. And so verse 4, God is talking to Moses. You have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bare you on eagle's wings, brought you unto myself. It's very important here, and I've said this 100 times, and I'm going to say it 1,000 more. Genesis, Exodus, the Pentateuch is the beginning of symbols. It is the foundation where all of the symbols that we read about throughout the rest of the book, especially when we get into the Old Testament prophets, and when we start looking at places like Revelation, that's all found here. Moses provides the foundation for the rest of the Bible and understanding the rest of the Bible. So here we have eagle's wings. God is saying, "I bore you up out of Egypt on eagle's wings," and so the metaphor is given. It's anchored here. What is God saying? Is that the eagle's wings are a symbol of protection, of removal from danger. There's this power represented in these wings because they are God acting to preserve his people. And so we see it here, and when we see the eagle's wings referenced, the Jewish people would look back to this because they had to know the Pentateuch very, very well. They had to know the law of Moses very well, these first 5 books very, very well. And so whenever they see a prophet refer to eagle's wings, this is what they're going to harken back to. We don't just make up what things mean in the Bible. There's nothing, none of us are divinely inspired. None of us have a miraculous gift to understand. Now, there's a lot of people that claim that today. There's a lot of people that say, well, the Holy Spirit's helping me understand. And they mean that in a miraculous sense. But then all of those millions of people who are claiming that teach a million different things. I don't make that claim. I do not believe that the Holy Spirit dwells in me in any miraculous sense and guides me in any miraculous sense. I believe the Holy Spirit guides me through the Word, and it is the Word that interprets itself, and this is how. So you look at the eagle's wings here. The eagle's wings are a symbol of God providing protection and removal, a powerful removal of his people from out of harm's way, from out of dangerous grasp. So that's the symbol here, and God is establishing what the symbol means. Man doesn't do that. We don't talk about helicopters and tanks and all that nonsense as a lot of people do when they get to the book of Revelation, or when they get into Isaiah and Jeremiah and stuff like that. And they want to transport everything to modern times because people interpret the Bible selfishly. No, we let the Bible interpret itself. And so this is where that symbol starts. All right. Verse 5, now therefore, if you will obey my voice indeed, and keep my covenant, then you shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine. Now listen to this. You're going to hear some very familiar language. We're a lot more familiar today in Western civilization with the New Testament than we are the Old. But if you look, a lot of what the New Testament says can be found in the Old Testament. That's why it's so important to understand it. Hey, Alex, Josh, welcome aboard. All right. So he says, if you will obey my voice. Now, that's a conditional statement. God is making a promise to Israel saying, if you will obey me and keep my covenant, that's the covenant that he's making in these 5 books here. If you will keep my covenant, then you will be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine. God created the entire universe. He created the whole planet. All of the land is his. So all of the people that live there are his. But he's going to set Israel apart. But it's important to understand that he made this conditional. He's telling them, if you keep my covenant, if you obey me. Well, did Israel do that? Throughout their history, what did Israel do? Over and over and over again, it was disobedience. So, hey, Stephen, welcome aboard. So they did, in fact, not do or keep their side of the requirements of this contract that God makes with them. So, Stephen, I had to go back and edit it. I apologize. I edited that message. I didn't mean for the Facebook Lives. The Facebook Lives will be the one thing that I continue. I just meant getting on and reading other people's posts. So, sorry about that. But I do want to continue the Bible study. I need to continue the Bible studies because, I just do. So, anyway, verse 7. And so, verse 6. It's a very, very, very important verse. Verse 6. And see if you've heard this before. And you shall be unto me a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. These are the words which thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel. Where do we find those exact words? Peter writes those exact same words in his letters. He tells the Christians that he's writing to that God has called out the Christians to be a peculiar people, to be a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. And the reason for that is because Israel, I can come out of timeout, thanks. So God tells Israel, first of all, if you will obey me and keep my commandments, then I will bless you and lift you up above all nations. Israel didn't keep their bargain. They didn't keep their contract. They failed over and over and over again. And so God eventually talks about making a new covenant, a better covenant, that all people of all physical nations can be a part of. He makes a new Israel, a new Jerusalem, a higher Jerusalem. And we read about that in places like Galatians chapter 4. And if you look in Hebrews chapter 12, it talks about you have come to Mount Zion, unto the heavenly Jerusalem, unto an innumerable company of messengers. And he says that that's the church. It's the church of the firstborn. And so these terms are that were once applied to Israel. Israel failed. The church, according to to Daniel 2:44, the church would never fail. The church would always be in existence, because of its nature. It's a spiritual kingdom, and it doesn't have anything to do with the physical. Now, that doesn't mean individual Christians can't fail. Individual Christians can reject God and turn away from God and fall back into sin and be lost. But as for the church itself, because of its nature, it cannot. The church will always be pure and undefiled. And so just keep in mind these terms. They're not new terms in the New Testament. They're not things that the apostles were just making up as brand new stuff. They were actually drawing very heavily because the gospel was actually preached throughout the Old Testament, but it was always preached in a looking forward kind of manner. So, yeah, Stephen, exactly, Revelation. Hey, Holly, Scott, welcome both of you. Thank you. This law here is the Pentateuch, not Genesis to Malachi necessarily. Yeah. So the law is really starts in the five books, and then everything that you read. Stephen is exactly right. Everything that you read post Deuteronomy is actually built on that foundation. The law is given in Genesis through Deuteronomy. And then all of the books that come after that are part of the Old Testament, part of the Old Covenant, are kind of like applications or historical documents that relate back to that law. So like we would think about the Constitution of the United States is the law. And then we might read the Federalist Papers that talk very extensively about the need for and the nature of the Constitution. The Federalist Papers don't constitute our law, but they are very useful and helpful in helping us to understand the law of America. And then we have historical records about all the things that have gone on since since Lexington, all the way up and even before that. So we have this 39 books of the Old Testament that are related to the law. They're all called the covenant. Jesus even refers to books outside of the first five books as the law, in the sense that they're all bound up together. There isn't a way to separate them meaningfully, but the first five books really are the law of Moses, and that's why they're called the law of Moses. You'll see Paul refer to the law over and over and over again. He's always referring back to the law of Moses when he says that. If he uses the word law in any of his letters without qualification, he's always referring to the law of Moses. So, all right. So Moses came and called for the elders of the people and laid before their faces all these words which Jehovah had commanded him. So he calls roughly about 20 people, and he says, all right, this is what God said. And then all the people answered together and said, all that Jehovah has spoken we will do. So After he tells all the elders disseminate that information. There's a big gathering, and then all the people. It's kind of like, again, I like to use our own history to talk about this because it really brings it home. The Constitution wasn't something that was just a bunch of guys closeted away. What happened was is when they wrote the Constitution, it got disseminated through all 13 states. And everybody had a chance to read it, everybody had a chance to comment on it, and they told their representatives who went back, and eventually it got signed into law. Same thing here. Moses tells the 20, or it's not 20, it's about that, but he goes and he tells the elders, and that includes like Aaron and her and these other guys, and he goes back and he tells them, all right, go tell all the people, tell everything that God has said. And so they go and they tell everybody what God had said, and then they all come and they agree unanimously, we will do all that Jehovah has spoken. Now remember that they agree to the contract. This isn't something God forced on them. God said, this is what the contract is going to be. And the people said, yes, we accept. Okay? So, it's fair to say that the prophets did not introduce new law. Rather, they told Israel to repent and keep the law. Yes. Yes, it is totally fair to say that. That is exactly right, Stephen. All of that is exactly right. It is fair to say that the prophets did not introduce new law, rather they told Israel to repent and keep the law that they received at Sinai and prophecies about the Messiah and his kingdom and covenant. That's everything, including the Pentateuch. The Pentateuch has prophecies as well, but the rest of the Old Testament is just pointing back to Moses, and all of it's pointing forward to Christ and the church. So that's you're dead on there. All right, so the people have agreed to this conditional covenant with God. It's not a forced thing. He tells Moses, Moses tells everybody else through the elders, and they all agree. Okay? They laid before their faces, so they are bowed down on their faces to the ground. All these words. Nope, I read that wrong. Sorry. Moses came and called for the elders, and they put it before the people. They put it before their faces. All these words, they told them straight up. Sorry, I thought they were bound on here. And all the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken, all that Jehovah has spoken, we will do. So they agreed to it wholeheartedly. And Moses returned the words of the people unto Jehovah. All right, so contract accepted. Everybody signed it. Everybody was on board. And Jehovah said unto Moses, lo, I come unto thee in a thick cloud. So what does the cloud represent? The cloud represents the presence of God. We see this over and over and over again, particularly God coming in a physical sense. His presence is there, and particularly the angel of God, that is the theophany, that is the pre-incarnated Christ. And so Christ is always here. He's always been the go-between between the Father and the people. So, excuse me. Welcome, Courtney. Appreciate you coming aboard with us. All right. So, he comes in a thick cloud, verse 9, that the people may hear when I speak with thee. So they're going to hear something when God is speaking with Moses, and believe you forever. So what's essentially going on here is God says, you know what, I'm going to come to you in a cloud. They're going to see the cloud, and I'm going to speak to you, and they're going to hear my voice. They may not hear specifically what I'm saying, but they're going to hear my voice, and they're going to believe that you got this from me, rather than it's just stuff that you made up for yourself. And they're going to believe that you are my messenger. And so Moses isn't making any of this up. In fact, I don't think Moses had it in him to make any of this up. God kind of chose him and just used him as a mouthpiece. Moses, remember, is a bit of a coward in a lot of ways. He wants Aaron to do all the talking because he's not a good public speaker and whatever. But Moses does kind of grow into this leadership role, and he does stand up, and he does have faith in God. And he's a very strong believer in God in that sense. But he's not somebody that has it in him to make up his own government. He's not like a Muhammad or one of these other guys, a Joseph Smith or somebody that just decided to make up their own religion one day, or an L. Ron Hubbard or something like that. Moses, from what I read of Moses would not have been able to do that. And so the evidence that God was speaking to him was the cloud, and that they would hear the voices, or they would hear the voice. And Moses told the words of the people unto Jehovah. And Jehovah said unto Moses, Go unto the people and sanctify them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes. So they're going to go cleanse themselves. Israel was all about the ritual cleansing and stuff, so they're going to go cleanse themselves. That's what sanctify means, is to clean. Today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes and be ready on the third day. All right, so 3 days. That's a big thing. It's throughout the Bible. We see 3 days, 3 days, 3 days. The number 3 stands for divinity. There's the Trinity. There's the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. And so that number 3 represents the divine. And so what he's saying is, I'm going to make you a kingdom of priests. Sanctify yourselves, cleanse yourselves, and on the third day, Jehovah will come down in the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai. Now it's called Mount Sinai. All right? So before it was just a mountain in the Sinai Desert. Here is where it specifically is called Mount Sinai. And this is a mountain within that range on the western border of Saudi Arabia. And thou shalt set bounds unto the people round about, saying, Take heed to yourselves that you go not up into the mount, or touch the border of it. Whosoever touches the mount shall be surely put to death. Okay, where God was going to be was holy. This is kind of like the precursor to the Holy of Holies, the most holy place within the tabernacle and later the temple. It's where God's presence was. Nobody was allowed to come in there except for the high priest. Later on, right now, it's Moses. Moses is fulfilling that role. And so nobody's supposed to touch it. Nobody's supposed to come up to the mountain. Any person or animal that does is to be put to death. There shall not a hand touch it, but he shall surely be stoned or shot through. Whether it be beast or man, it shall not live. When the trumpet sounds long, they shall come up to the mount. Okay, so the trumpet is gonna give a specific long note, and then everybody's gonna approach the mountain, but nobody gets to touch it. They have to stay back or behind, and Moses is supposed to mark off where they're not supposed to go past. So Moses went down from the mount unto the people and sanctified the people. So he helped in the cleansing rituals, and they washed their clothes. And he said unto the people, Be ready against the third day. Come not at your wives. Now that means that the men and the women were supposed to keep themselves separated. No husband and wife hanky-panky type stuff, because they were having a bit of a fast in that sense from each other, so that they remained focused on what was going to happen. This was a big deal that was coming. So Lester, welcome aboard. Roderick, welcome aboard. All right. And so verse 16, And it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud upon the mount. Well, where do we hear thunders and lightnings? It's the book of Revelation. What does the thunders and the lightnings represent? It represents God speaking. You hear voices, and you hear the voice of many waters, and all of these different symbols in Revelation that are used. They're not new things. John is drawing very heavily on Moses and on the Old Testament prophets for this. And so you hear the sound of the trumpet, and then you hear the lightnings and the thunderings, and that signifies the presence of God and the voice of God. So continuing in verse 16, And the voice of the trumpet exceeding loud, so that all the people that was in the camp trembled. It was so loud that people were kind of afraid of it. Hey Linda, hey Tracy, welcome aboard. All right. Verse 17, And Moses brought forth the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the nether part of the mountain. In other words, they were just back. They weren't touching the mountain itself, but they were just outside of it. And Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because Jehovah had descended upon it in fire. And the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mount quaked greatly. So now we have God's presence. We have a cloud. We have thunders. We have lightning. We have an earthquake. Okay, the ground is quaking. We have fire, and we have smoke. Well, where have we seen those things? Not only have we seen them in Revelation. Joel talks about them in Joel 2, and then we also see that in Acts chapter 2. And Peter says that these are the things that Joel talked about. And there would be fire and vapor of smoke, and the sun would be darkened, and the moon would turn to blood. All of these symbols, they have their beginning here. And what it means is God is delivering his law, His presence is there, and he is moving in the world. That's what these symbols are talking about. Fire particularly is about judgment. In this case, the judgment's a good thing. The people have accepted the contract with God, and so he's getting into this covenant with them, and he's going to give them the laws, the covenant that they are going to be bound to. So these are symbols that we need to pay attention to, because we're going to see them over and over and over again. They're not new things when we get into the apocalyptic texts. And when the voice of the trumpet sounded long and waxed louder and louder, Moses spake, and God answered him by a voice. And Jehovah came down upon Mount Sinai, on the top of the mount, and Jehovah called Moses up to the top of the mount, and Moses went up. And Jehovah said unto Moses, Go down, charge the people, lest they break through unto Jehovah to gaze, and many of them perish. So Moses goes up to the top of the mountain, and Jehovah says, hey, they're so anxious to catch a sight of me, they're about to break through and touch the mountain, they're going to die. There's a lot of people that are going to die. You need to go down there, tell them to back off. So Moses goes down and warns them, and it says, And let the priests also, which come near to Jehovah, sanctify themselves, lest Jehovah break forth upon them. So he's kind of given a command, hey, the priests, when I set up your priesthood and everything, when they come near to me, they need to be sanctified, or they're gonna be killed. If a priest comes into me and he hasn't gone through all of these ritual cleansings and stuff, then he would face death for doing so. And it was very important that they remembered these things, to do things the way that God set things up. He was very serious about it. There was a death penalty to fail to do these things. For us, it's the same way under the New Testament, but it's not a physical death, it's a spiritual death. When we do things in a way that God has not commanded us to do it, when we just take things into our own hand, when our arrogance takes over, and God didn't say not to do this. God gave us a way to do things. If we go outside of that, if we go beyond that, think that we know better than God how to worship God, we face spiritual death, the sin that separates us from God, according to Isaiah 59, 1 and 2. And so looking here, we know that God gives them very specific commands, and they have to keep them or face death. The lesson there is of the importance of doing things God's way. Verse 23, And Moses said unto Jehovah, The people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for thou chargest us, saying, Set bounds about the mount and sanctify it. And Jehovah said unto him, Away, get thee down, and thou shalt come up, thou and Aaron with thee, but let not the priests and the people break through to come up unto Jehovah, lest he break forth upon them. So Moses went down unto the people and spoke unto them. So Moses says Aaron could come up, because Aaron's always kind of been the right-hand man. He's always been the speaker and everything. So Aaron gets to go up. He's the first high priest. Everybody else has to stay back, or they will die. And so Moses tells everybody that. And then this is the message, after Moses gets back up there with Aaron and everybody settled down, this is the message that God gives to Moses. Now, these aren't the 10 Commandments written in stone. These are those commandments, but this is not the version where he gets it written in stone. This is the kind of the beginning version of it, if you will. We won't get to those until a fairly later chapter here. All right, but this is the foundation. This is where they start all of the laws, all of the rules. The Sabbath was important. It was instituted when they started doing the manna and the quail and stuff, but it wasn't highlighted yet. It was just, hey, you're not supposed to do stuff on this. It was more of a kind of a practice run, if you will, with the manna and the quail. God giving them a practical start into the Sabbath and keeping the Sabbath or whatever. But here we're going to actually get the law. Chapter 20, verse 1, And God spake all of these words, saying, I am Jehovah your God, which has brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Again, I stress this often, I am Jehovah thy God. It is very important that his name be understood here in this context. And again, I don't agree with the switching out of his name for this Lord or whatever they're doing. God never said, don't say my name. God never said, don't write my name. He didn't do that. He wanted his name to be known. And this is a very powerful instance of that. I am Jehovah thy God. He wanted people to know him. as opposed to all of the fake gods that were around that everybody was building and worshiping, all of the dirt and the sticks and the stupid stuff that they were making to worship. I am Jehovah thy God, which has brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. That idea there of Egypt and bondage is very powerful, and it is ingrained in the psyche of the Israelite nation, of the Jewish nation. And when we see Egypt in the New Testament, when the Jews are compared to Egypt, it's a sucker punch in the gut to be compared, that they are now like Egypt in a spiritual sense, in the way that they are trying to persecute the church and stuff. And it's a powerful metaphor that God is using here, but he sets it up by saying, I brought you out of bondage, I brought you out of Egypt. And so all of these things that he says negatively about Egypt over and over and over again throughout their history, and then when we get to the New Testament times, oh, by the way, you're like Egypt. That's just a huge gut punch there. All right. Egypt is also a land full of gods, full of these fake gods, and God, Jehovah God, dealt with them very powerfully in sending those plagues. Those plagues weren't God being mean. That's not what God was doing. God is a loving God, but he also needs people to understand, and he has to do things in a way that mankind will understand. And so overcoming those gods, that was the primary purpose of doing those 10 plagues, was to show his power over these fake gods, because every single one of them represented Egyptian gods. And so now he says, I've brought you up out of bondage, I've brought you up out of Egypt, you will have no other gods before me. He's saying, you stay away from these fake gods, because I showed you they don't have any power. I'm the only one that has power. And then he says, this is a continuation of that idea. Hey, Kate, welcome aboard. Volcano. I missed the text, or the context of that. I guess that's back to the smoke and the fire and all of that. All right. But this is the continuation of the thought of Egypt, bondage, and gods. He says, you shall not make any graven images or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, that's in the sky or in space, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. So the sky, land, and sea, nobody's supposed to make any carvings or anything that represents these things to be worshipped as an idol. Okay? There's nothing in the world that represents God. God is a being that is so far superior to creation that you can't look to anything and say that God is like this. In fact, God has to manifest himself in ways that we can understand, like we see when Jesus is immersed by John the Immerser, that the Holy Spirit appears like a dove. Jesus himself came in the form of a man, God the Son did. There's times where God manifests himself in a way that we can interact. But those things that's not what God looks like. That's not a representation of God. That's God manifesting himself in the physical world so that we can interact with him. Okay? So anyway, we're not supposed to make, or the Israelites, because this is just for the Jews. Remember, this contract here is just with the Israelites. We are not under this law. Gentiles were never under this law. This is a contract between this particular nation and God. And there's a lot of people in the world who do not understand that. Okay? The Israelites were not supposed to have any. Now, that doesn't mean that the Gentiles could have graven images and it's okay with God. You can read through Romans, and it talks about the Gentiles keeping the law even though they weren't under it, because they understood that there were certain things that were right and wrong, and that comes from the tree of knowledge and their conscience and all that. But specifically, the contract here is with the Israelites, and specifically God is saying, you will have no graven images, you will not carve anything that's from the sky or from the sea or from the land. And then again, continuing this thought, thou shalt not bow down yourself to them, nor serve them, for I, Jehovah, thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. It's powerful. Okay? Don't bow down and serve these, because God is jealous. Is jealousy wrong? In this context, it is not. God has every right to be jealous because he is the creator. to say that it's okay for you to go worship some other fake god that you carved out of some wood or something is the same thing as saying that is a husband saying to his wife, it's okay if you go sleep with another man. And uh, for God to be jealous in the sense of not wanting the people that he created, the people that are his own people, to say, I've made you a holy nation, I've sanctified you for myself, you have a purpose, and then for them to go off and worship other gods. He calls them some pretty nasty names when they do that so many times. Read Isaiah chapter 1. He calls them prostitute. He calls them whores. He calls them, read Ezekiel 16. And then, of course, when you get to Revelation, you have the whore that is called Babylon. That's Jerusalem. Because they were not faithful. And here is the beginning of that. He says, if you do this, then your sin is going to end up corrupting multiple generations after you. Your grandsons and your great-grandsons are going to be just like you, because it's such a horrible thing once you start down that dark path. It is a hard thing to return out of it, and we see that especially once the nation splits. The northern kingdoms, they go off into worshiping false gods and stuff immediately, and they never come back, and they end up getting dissipated into nothing. The Assyrians come in, conquer them, wipe them out. We never see them again. Those 10 tribes are gone. And then the Jews, they kind of limp along, and they have a good king, and they're faithful for a little bit, and then they fall for several generations, and then they have another good king, and then they fall for several, and then they just kind of limp along, and God preserves them to bring Messiah into the world as he promised, because God fulfilled his part of the contract, but Israel doesn't, and a huge part of it is this worshiping of the false gods. Hey, Eli. Okay, so verse 6, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. So he offers a counterpoint here for those who bow down before these false gods, for those who worship these fake, false, carved things that they made. There's going to be problems, but God will show mercy unto the thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. Well, where have we heard that before? Well, that's John 14 when Jesus is talking to his apostles. He's given them kind of their last mission parameters, and he says, if you love me, keep my commandments. That's not a new thing. Here God is saying that those who love me and keep my commandments, I'm going to show mercy to them. Number 7, and I like this one. The first 5 commandments are how to love God. The last 5 deal how you're to love others. The other 603 are grouped by the 10. Right, yeah, absolutely so. These are kind of like the overarching. This would be, in a sense, kind of like our Bill of Rights or our articles, and then all of the civil laws that we have, Brian, would be like all of the 603. So this is their constitution in that sense. And then all of the other laws that we have here in America proceed out of that Constitution. So that's a good way to look at it. All right. So the next law, the next thing that God says here, and this is another one that people get wrong: thou shalt not take the name of Jehovah thy God in vain, for Jehovah will not hold him guiltless that takes his name in vain. 2 points to make here. Number 1, his name is not God. God is the type of being that he is. His name is Jehovah. So if somebody is using the word God in a kind of empty, flippant way, not saying that's a great thing to do, but that would be somebody referring to me saying, human? Well, what? That is what he is. He is God. But his name is Jehovah. Second, what does it mean to take Jehovah's name in vain? It doesn't mean to take it, to use it in a way that is a flippant or kind of an uncaring kind of way, although it came to mean that. Using Jehovah's name in vain, and we'll see this in later places, and I'll highlight those when we get to them, but using Jehovah's name in vain is to say that God said to do this or Jehovah authorized this when he didn't in fact do that. And the Pharisees were notorious for doing that. When you get into the gospel accounts, Jesus chides them for it. And he says, the Old Testament says to honor your father and mother, and you say Corban. Let's practice Corban, and it is a gift, and you think that's enough to honor your father and mother, but you actually nullify God's law by making your own laws and saying that God said it was okay. That's what it means to take Jehovah's name in vain, is when you make stuff up and do it your own way. It's arrogance, it's hubris, it's I know better than God how to worship and serve God. And everybody in the world is struggling with that. That's why there are so many denominations in the world, is because every denomination is founded on the idea of, I know better than other men, and I know better than God how God wants me to worship. Anybody who is worshiping and organizing and serving in a way that isn't outlined in the Bible, that they've got their own creeds and their own manuals and their own way to do things. I'm looking at you, Catholic Church. When you do things in a way that you think or you're saying God said to do this, and you don't actually have the real authority, because you don't. The authority of God is from the Bible alone. That's using Jehovah's name in vain. And that's one of these 10 big ones, what Brian was saying, that all other laws are of the Old Testament are founded on this. And guess what? 9 of these are actually in the New Testament too. The Sabbath is not. But 9 of these are brought forward into the New Testament. They're part of that new covenant that the church is supposed to obey. So anybody who is saying, let's add instruments to our worship, God never authorized that, but you say Jehovah says it's okay, that's using God's name in vain. That's what that means. If you want to practice Corban instead of honoring your father and mother, that's using Jehovah's name in vain. Let's only meet to partake of the Lord's Supper once a quarter, or once a year, or twice a year. God said to do it every first day of the week. That's using Jehovah's name in vain. That's what it means. And so many people in the world use that phrase incorrectly. They don't understand what it means, and they have this arrogance to think, I'm gonna practice and worship the way that I want to because it makes me feel good, and they don't really practice what God says, and they can't justify their practice from the scriptures. Swear falsely is the alternate translation. Yeah, never put words in God's mouth. That's exactly right. You're not supposed to say that God said this. That's exactly where I'm going. Hey, Kristen, welcome aboard. So, very, very powerful verse there, but a lot of people get that one wrong. All right. Now, I actually refer to this, these next few, it's the next 4 verses a lot in my apologetic stuff. Even though I don't keep the Sabbath, and I don't believe that the New Testament requires us to keep the Sabbath, this is actually a very powerful and useful verse, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that tonight. It says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, verse 8. 6 days shall you labor and do all thy work. Okay, so we're talking about the week here. They're going to work for 6 days. Everybody reading this gets that it's 6 literal days. But the 7th day is the Sabbath of Jehovah thy God. All right, we get it. So that last day of the week, we're not going to do anything. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. All right, God, we get it. You work for 6 days, you take the 7th day off. Why? For in 6 days Jehovah made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested on the 7th day. Wherefore Jehovah blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. You have to work for 6 days and rest on the 7th day. They're literal days because God worked for 6 days and rested on the 7th day. And anybody who teaches that the Bible somehow allows for anything other than a literal 6-day creation does not know how to read. That's all they're can. It needs help. They have to push meaning into the scriptures that's just not there, because this passage by itself absolutely destroys anything but a literal 6-day creation. You cannot logically come to the conclusion. You have to take all of the modern science and all of the doubt and the compromise and all of the crazy things that the world, that man, that scientists, most of them atheists, have come up with and have tried to get people to believe without evidence. And we can talk about evidence, because I can talk about the young earth evidence and the evolution non-evidence till I'm blue in the face. But they've taken all of that and they've tried to shove it into Genesis chapter 1. And it's not there. And it doesn't belong there. And this passage wipes it out absolutely and completely. It's 6 days that they work, 7 days. They take the seventh day off because God worked 6 days, took the seventh day off. It's the same word. It's the word yom. It's numbered. All of those numbers were there in Genesis chapter 1. They're literal days. If you believe anything else, you don't believe the Bible. It's just that clear. You can't have both. You cannot compromise the truth of the scriptures. If you want to believe the Bible to be true, you have to throw away rocks to man evolution. It is garbage. It is useless. It has no basis in evidence whatsoever. And if you want to talk to me about the evidence against it, I'll show you the physics behind it. I can show you the chemistry and the biology too, but I prefer the physics because it's pretty straightforward and easy to understand. But the Bible is very consistent and very clear. The earth was created in 6 literal days. That's all I'm going to say about it. Verse 12. Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which Jehovah thy God gives thee. Why are they supposed to honor their father and mother? Number one, they're supposed to honor their father and mother because it is a type of honoring our Father who's in heaven. You honor your father and mother, even if they're lousy, and mine aren't. Mine are great. I love my parents. They're awesome. And I'm not saying that just because they're watching Hi Mom, Hi Dad. But even if your parents are lousy, you still honor them in the sense of them being your parents, and you do your best to show them honor for bringing you into the world. All right, that your days may be long upon the land which Jehovah thy God shall give thee. Why were the Israelites supposed to honor their father and mother? Because they were going to be fathers and mothers. And when they were fathers and mothers and grandfathers and grandmothers, who was supposed to be honoring them? Their children. This is about passing things on to the next generation. And this is one of those things that were brought forward into the New Testament for the same reason. Who is the number one person responsible for teaching Bible to the next generation? It's the parents. And I gotta say, and I'm not bragging on me here, I'm bragging on my parents. My parents did an awesome job. They instilled in us just an amazing amount of not just Bible knowledge, but the skills and the desire to study the scriptures and to dig down deep. And that's what this is. That's what this is really about. It's about that preservation. It's about the generations moving forward and the continuation of those who are going to worship God. And we see that now in the churches where we see the young men and the young women who are taught to love God, who are taught about the scriptures, who get into the Bible classes and they dig deep and they're paying attention and they're learning all of these things. My kids are getting pretty good about that. They're starting to ask a lot of questions, and we have a lot of really good discussions. Whatever they ask, I don't hold anything back, and we dig in when we talk about what the Bible says. So it's a very, very important verse there. Verse 13, thou shalt not kill. Now, this is one of those that I think a lot of people actually understand pretty well, but they purposefully misapply it. They want to say, you can't kill at all. And that's not what this verse is saying. It's the only actual word that I looked up in Hebrew. It's ratsak. Probably totally mispronouncing that. But it is about murder, manslaughter, slaying. It's premeditated to kill somebody in a way that is unauthorized. This is not about justice. This is not about self-defense or any of those conditional types of killing where killing was something that you need to do. It's obviously not about war. God can't say, thou shalt not kill, and then lead his people into war over and over and over again. That would be completely contradictory. But the idea here is you shall not take life without without authorization. I can't go to the local store and kill somebody to take their money. I can't get mad at somebody who did something wrong to me and kill them, as much as I may want to. And absolutely the most horrendous thing, the thing that makes my blood boil more than anything else, is the murder of babies, the murder of the unborn. You know, when we start talking about the murder of the unborn, that is the most despicable, disgusting, evil thing that mankind has ever conceived of. You know, when we look at Moloch and we look at Baal, at least the babies were born. And I'm not saying that that's good, or that that's somehow better that they killed babies, but we don't even wait today. They're not even born. We go up inside the mothers and we cut them apart, and it's disgusting and gross and evil. God says, don't murder. And people are still wanting to do that today. We're at 60 million deaths here in America since 1973. And it makes my stomach turn, and there's nothing that makes me angrier than the idea. I don't even refer to it as abortion anymore. If somebody wants to talk about it with me, we're going to talk about baby murders, because that's what they're doing. It's baby murder. All right. Hey, Christy, welcome aboard. Yeah, murder is absolutely the correct translation. So Brian asked here a question: what about a day is 1,000 years to Jehovah? All right, so we're in 2 Peter, and this passage really is abused and taken out of its context here. Hey, Victor, that the 1,000 years in 2 Peter is a reference to the idea of God's long suffering. It isn't meant to be a mathematical equation. Nobody is supposed to go to 2 Peter and say, "Oh, a day is 1,000 years. 1,000 years is a day." Even if it was, let's go down that rabbit hole for just a moment. To say that the Bible says that the 6 days of creation were actually 6,000 years of creation still doesn't get us anywhere close to the millions and millions and millions of years that evolution requires. And I'm not granting that mathematical equation, and I'm not saying that those days were 1,000 years in Genesis 1. But allowing it for the sake of argument, just for the moment, doesn't get us anywhere close to what the atheistic evolutionists are convincing a bunch of people who are supposed to be followers of God to cram into Genesis chapter 1. Furthermore, just as a side note here, for those of you who are millennialists that are watching, if you are going to abuse this verse in one place, you have to use it everywhere. Your 1,000-year reign of Christ is only going to be 24 hours. That's not nearly as impressive. Just saying. So, hope that answered the question. Oh yeah. 100%. Abortion is absolutely murder. The followers of Moloch, they're erecting statues. They're not even hiding it anymore. They're erecting statues of Moloch all over the place. It's just absolutely gross. Like to the point the nation's falling apart. Okay, the next one. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Adultery is where you have sex with somebody who's not your spouse. Plain as day, don't do it. It's sinful, it's wrong. It's wrong in the Old Testament, it's wrong in the New Testament. Hold on. It's unfaithfulness. It is not honoring your word that you gave when you got married. It is turning the truth into a lie. It is reflected in, or this is typifying the idea of our faithfulness to God, our faithfulness to Christ, Ephesians chapter 5. And there's a reason that this is in that constitution, that top 10. And if you commit adultery, it doesn't matter what you say. You can use all of the words and whatever, but when you commit adultery, you are presenting evidence that you do not love the spouse that you are cheating against. That's what adultery means. Is you may really like them still. You may have some feelings for them, but if you have come to the point where you are willing to do this, to have sex with somebody who is not your spouse, you have just told your spouse, I don't love you anymore. And that's a very hard thing for a lot of people to accept. The person who is doing the cheating will blow it off, most likely, if they don't feel guilt for it. Some feel guilt for it. Maybe it is a one-time mistake. But for those who continue in the adultery, they blow it off. It's not a big deal, whatever. And they don't understand the hurt that they're causing the faithful partner. And for the person who is cheating, oftentimes the person who's committing the adultery would throw a fit if their spouse did the same thing to them. So it makes them liars and hypocrites. And there is a reason that the adultery is such a powerful law, is because the family unit is the most basic unit of civilization. And if you don't have that family, if you don't have the mother and father and the generation of new children to carry on, society itself breaks down. And that's why we see here in America, we've seen for quite a long time, the divorce rate has gone up. You have infidelity has just become a thing that you do. And now we're getting into a whole host of other things with homosexuality and with all of the just perversions that we see in the world. They're all attacks on the family unit, the nuclear unit. And you see it before you. I don't even have to cite the evidence. Everybody watching and everybody that ever sees this video is going to know what I'm talking about. Our society is unraveling around us. And a huge part of that is because the family has been attacked so hard and so consistently. Yep, exactly what I said, Brian. So your comments are coming because y'all are lagging behind me a little bit, but it's nice to see that we're in agreement here. All right, verse 15, thou shalt not steal. Our Constitution is based on this idea, another man's property, there's ownership there. God is very much about private property and ownership of things. It's only with our own property that we can do things. Anybody that says that the Bible supports communism is, again, not somebody that can read very well. You can't steal if you can't own anything. If I can't actually have property, nobody can steal from me because it's not mine to begin with. Theft implies ownership. And so God says don't steal, don't take from another man. Adultery is kind of that. Stealing, this is more about property and stuff. Don't take somebody else's stuff. Why? Because they worked for it. They earned that. They put in all of the labor for that. And when you steal from them, you are hurting them. You are not showing that person love. You're showing that person that you don't care about them at all. They don't mean anything to you. Because you're basically taking away their livelihood. You're taking away things from them that are part of their support for their family. And so stealing is absolutely wrong, not just because God said so, but because of what it does. You want that they have. If you want, somebody wants my old Nintendo Wii, don't come steal it. Okay? Ask me. I might be willing to give it to you. Okay? You need a car? I might be willing to give you my one of my vehicles. Okay? Don't steal from me. I might need what it is that you're taking. Right now, if you came and you stole my truck, my old 96 Ranger, I don't have any way to get around town. My wife's out of town. She went out of town for a funeral. I don't have any way to get around town. And she would need the Jeep to cart the kids around while I'm going to work during the school year. You steal from us, that makes our lives hard in this society. And it's even harder in societies where there is very little that people have to begin with. The less they have, the more powerful stealing is, because it takes something that is even more valuable to that family. unfortunately, it's in those needy areas that theft is the most rampant. Don't steal. Work together. Help each other. Love one another. That's where that verse is coming in. That's where that law is coming in. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Verse 16. Don't lie about people. Don't, and this is where gossip comes out of this, but don't say wrong things or untrue things about your neighbor. Because when you do that, number one, you're showing that you don't love them, and number two, you're going to cause problems for them that they shouldn't have to go through. It's unjust. It's unloving to do that. It's a lie, and God hates lying. Number 17, you shall not covet thy neighbor's house, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. And this last commandment here, this isn't about adultery in the act. This isn't about the stealing in the act. But this is about the inordinate desire that leads to the act. Don't even desire your neighbor's wife. Don't even desire. You may never act on. You may never commit adultery. But don't even dwell on your neighbor's wife or husband. It works both ways. Don't look at somebody's means of production and want those things to the point that you covet them, that you have this desire that you're basically stealing those things in your heart. That's what covetousness is. You may never act on it. God's saying don't even think about it. Don't let that covetousness, that desire for those things come. You want a truck? I got a truck. Okay? You want a truck? You want a truck like mine? Awesome. Go work for it. Buy yourself a Ford Ranger. It's been an awesome vehicle. Okay? 96 Ford Ranger. It's almost 30 years old now. Don't covet mine. And I'm not supposed to covet your things. Because in that covetousness is hatred for your fellow man, or at the very best, an absolute lack of care. You mean nothing to me, and because you're nothing, I can take your things. And we've seen that throughout the history of the world. Groups of people are denigrated. They're made into nothing by society. And then society says, we don't care about you anymore, so we're going to start taking things from you. And ultimately, what does it lead to? It leads to taking their lives. Because they are meaningless anyway, so we're just going to take their lives. Whether it be old people, whether it be babies, whether it be a particular race, it doesn't matter. All through history, we've seen this take place. And covetousness is where all of this begins. And so that God says, don't even do that. Don't even let it come into your heart that you want another man's property or another man's wife. All right, let's see here. Don't lie in court or cause a person to be punished falsely. Lying to save yourself or others is different to me. Well, in this particular context, don't bear false witness. The idea of false witness is the legal sense. You're right in that sense. But in terms of lying in general, there's other places where God says don't lie, and it's the more general idea. So, and all the people saw the thunderings. Verse 18. We're almost done here. All the people saw the thunderings and lightnings and the noise of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they removed and stood afar off. So they see all these things, and they finally back up and stop pressing towards the mountain so they don't die. And they said unto Moses, so Moses comes back down, and they said unto Moses, speak thou with us, and we will hear, but let no God speak with us, lest we die. So they saw all of that, and they finally changed their minds, and they were like, we want to see God, we want to see God. They were pressing in, and then finally God starts doing all of his thing, and they see all that, and they were afraid, and they're like, Moses, why don't you talk to us? And we don't really want to hear God, because that will probably end in us being dead. And so it worked out. And Moses said unto the people, fear not, for God has come to prove you. He's come to test you, to refine you, and that his fear may be before your faces, that you sin not. He did that so that you would back off. And the people stood afar off, and Moses drew near into the thick darkness where God was. And Jehovah said unto Moses, Thou shalt say unto the children of Israel, You have seen that I have talked with you from heaven. You shall not make with me gods of silver, neither shall you make unto you gods of gold. An altar of earth. All right, now this is talking about worshiping God. God says, do not make for me, of me, anything of gold or of silver. I don't want physical wealth to be what you worship me on. He says, you make a simple altar out of earth. Verse 24, you shall make unto me, you shall sacrifice thereon thy burnt offering and thy peace offering, thy sheep and thine oxen, in all places where I record my name, I will come unto thee and I will bless thee. If thou wilt make an altar of stone, thou shalt not build it of hewn stone. So if they built an altar, they had to go pick up stones and just put them and make the altar out of whatever they found. They weren't supposed to cut it and craft it and make it all fancy looking, because that gets into those graven images. And God was saying, you don't make anything. Even if you're trying to worship me, you don't make anything, because what would happen is they would come to worship the image rather than God himself. Catholics, again, I'm looking at you, because that's what you do. And if you will make an altar of stone, you should not build it of hewn stone, for if you lift up thy tool upon it, you have polluted it. Neither shall you go up by steps unto mine altar. So they couldn't build an altar that was high up into high places, when they absolutely fail all the time to do that. We read about all the high places in Israel and whatever. But they weren't supposed to build an altar high up. They were supposed to build it at ground level, so that people looking up watching the worship didn't see them naked, to see up into the robes and stuff. Yes, you may. I'm still finishing my life here, though, and you're interrupting. You need to be in bed a little bit. So that they weren't supposed to even build an altar up high. They're supposed to build it out of dirt or out of stone. Stone couldn't be worked with tools. It just had to be kind of placed on one on the other. A real simple affair. And they were supposed to worship God that way. God is the same as he has always been. God does not want ostentatiousness. God wants us to worship him his way. And so when God said, sing, and we had all of this fanfare with all of these instruments. You started with the piano, but you get into all of these rock bands and all of the flashing lights and the big productions and stuff like that. Is that what God commanded? Or is that an altar of gold and an altar of silver where he's asked for simple earth? See, there isn't anything new. God hasn't changed. Now, the law was changed, and there needed to be a change because of what Christ represented. But the nature of God has not changed at all. He does not want physical fanfare. He wants the simple, unadulterated, unpolluted worship that he has asked us to give him. And that's all. And anything else that we add to that is arrogance. So... all right, so that gets us through the next two chapters, 19 and 20. All the rest of them, I got everything up on YouTube. I even got the remake of, I believe it was 13 and 14 that I re-recorded. Those are all up. I'll get this one up here probably in the next few days or so as I have another batch to post up on YouTube. Thank you guys for joining me. I know we've been here for... wow, a little bit over an hour. This one was a long one, so thank you for staying with me for this, and I hope you got something out of it. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. I will try to I'll go back through and check on any questions and stuff. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Share the live if you got something out of it and you think others will as well. But thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you guys have a wonderful evening.